Hi again, Concetta. In our last conversation, we were talking about the evolution of divorce and the importance of out-of-court options, which we always agree on. So today I thought that maybe we would dive into some of the biggest myths and things that I hear a lot of people talking about, and I know you hear it too. So maybe we'll just do little snippets and talk about the myth, and then let's talk about the reality.
There are a lot of myths and misconceptions for
So
sure.
many misconceptions, yeah. And especially with the fear around divorce and the sort of the thought process of I'm going to lose everything. So I think that these myths just get perpetuated. So I think it's a good idea for us to take a deep dive and say, hey, this is the truth and this is not. So the number one myth that we talk about all the time, divorce always means going to court.
No, it doesn't today.
It doesn't. Yep. And so what if you don't go to court, then what are your options?
Well, let's put it this way. To get a divorce, you have to put paperwork through court. That doesn't mean the parties have to litigate through court. So that has drastically changed. A lot of people aren't aware that they have that option, and that's why we're here doing this. But you don't have to go to court. And I said this before. I tell my clients in these kind of processes, they don't even have to drive by a courthouse, let alone go into one. The paperwork has to be processed. That's it.
But that's a good distinction because I have heard people, when I've talked about collaborative, I have sort of left that out. The only person who can actually get you divorced is a judge by signing it. So the paperwork does have to go to court. So when I always say you don't have to go to court, it's like, oh, okay, so then we just sign and we're done. No. You sign the agreement, it goes to court, and then the judge signs the actual divorce decree.
And a lot of people don't understand in New York, family court can't give you a divorce. The only person that can give you a divorce is a Supreme Court justice signing a judgment of divorce and making a judgment in order of the court.
Right, but the couple doesn't have to go.
Nope.
Beautiful. So let's talk about myth number 2 then. A second myth that a lot of people say is when it comes to custody, mothers always get custody of the children.
That may have been archaic times, but that isn't the case today.
Yeah, I think there used to be this presumption that mothers were better caregivers, so they got...
Well, they were drawing on times when mom stayed at home and didn't work, and they were the caregiver. But it depends on how a couple shares that responsibility. And sometimes that drastically changes as a result of the divorce because the spouse that wasn't involved in the child care because they were, spending more time making the money or whatever, or doing other things to build and secure for the family, that dynamic changes because now you're both responsible for taking care of your children in a real impetus way. You don't have a choice. You're now going to be living separate and apart. And if you want to be a part of your children's lives, then you have to be responsible for them. Right. So that dynamic changes drastically when you're looking at a dissolution. So whether they wanted to or not, they have to get involved if they want to be part of their children's lives.
Right. And a lot of people have heard the expression, the best interest of the children. So if mom having custody is not in the best interest of the children, whatever that sort of vague term means, according to the court, mom's not going to have full custody of the children because the court has determined it's not in the best interest of the children.
Well, for the most part, most people, I think, come to the consensus that it's in the best interest of children to have two parents.
Exactly. To have them
whatever
both
those two parents are involved in or whatever, whether it be a same-sex marriage, adoption, or, a heterosexual couple, the bottom line is, if this child has two parents before the divorce, they should have two parents after the divorce. Mm-hmm. And what's in their best interest and what that should be the focus, like you and I have talked about this before, many times they get lost in the shuffle in a divorce.
That's very true.
And that's horrible because they should be the impetus of what happens. But sometimes the parties are so interested in, fighting with one another, they lose sight that, they have children to take care of. So,
yeah. But that is a good thing to debunk is that a lot of times people think mom's going to get custody. That's not always the case. Mm-mm. Another myth is that divorce means that everything is going to be 50-50. I have to automatically give up half.
That's a really big assumption and myth. They think it's a 50-50. The law in New York is equitable distribution. That does not equate to 50-50. It may, depending on the circumstances. And there's a lot to consider because what people don't realize from the day you said I do, the engagement ring was before I said I do, so that's separate property. What they acquire as a marital couple, if they use marital earnings, that could be marital property. Marital property and separate property are two different things. Mm-hmm. So even though I'm married, I can acquire something like my mom or my dad either gives me a gift or I get something in an inheritance, if I keep it in my name alone, that's marital. Okay? That's not marital. That's separate. Sorry, I misspoke. Okay? But if I take that, say mom gave me $100,000 and I put it in an account in my name, it's mine. But if I took that $100,000 and I built a kitchen in the marital home, guess what? I kind of converted that.
It's different.
Or if I put it in my spouse's name with me on a joint account, then it becomes marital. So a lot of people may think 50-50, but they have to look at and understand what we talked about before, having a financial picture of what our finances are, what we own, what we owe, what's separate, what's marital. That gives you a better perspective. And that's not, if you looked at the total, you may think, I get 50-50 of all of that. And you're thinking, well, the house was ours. Well, no, maybe dad gave that to his daughter. I have a case like that right now. And the husband thinks, I'm getting half of that house.
And that's
it's never been in his name. Yeah, you paid rent to dad, but that was living expenses.
Yeah. And that's why, like we always talk about, it's better to resolve these things outside of court, because the only person who can determine what's equitable is a judge, right? If the two of you have not worked out what's actually equitable, it's going to be up to a judge. There's no automatic 50-50 in an equitable distribution.
And
state.
what a judge thinks is equitable and what you think is equitable could be the Grand Canyon.
Very different things.
Right.
Good point. So then, speaking of judges, another myth and a big one that I hear is, well, the judge, of course, is going to see my side. My soon-to-be ex is such an SOB, and they did me wrong, and all I have to do is get in and tell the judge my story, and they're going to take my side.
That's one of probably the biggest misconceptions, because people feel that if they just get to tell their story, whoever's listening is going to see it for what it is from their perspective. Not that there's another perspective out there. But regardless, you know what? The judge doesn't care about either person's perspective, because they're not there to decide who did what to who. They don't care about somebody stepping out on a marriage or somebody doing something. Unless it's criminal, they're not involved. And they don't care what you did 2 weeks ago. They don't care what you did 3 years ago, including how you may have spent your money together.
To the point where judges have actually said, and I'm sure you've heard it too, I don't care about that, counsel. I don't care. Move on. They will say the words, I don't care. I don't want to hear it.
And the look on your client's face when it happens is like, what are they talking about? That's my money they're talking about.
Yes, that's my story. That's my hurt. Those are the things I want brought up, and the judge does not want to hear it.
But, as I've said before, the client never gets to speak in that process unless they're sworn on the stand giving testimony. And even then, it's limited to what the judge wants to hear. You don't get to just say what your story is.
Exactly. There's rules of evidence that have to be followed, and it depends on the judge and how lenient they are.
And if they're not talking about past deeds or what, so did to you, they only want to know who owns the house. That's the question that's being answered and answered, asked and answered.
Yeah, agreed. So a judge is not going to listen to your story.
No, unfortunately,
myth busted.
You could go to a mental health professional. They'll listen all you want.
And your money and your time is better spent that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So another myth is that LGBTQ marriages and divorces are treated the same everywhere.
No. There are so many intricate levels. First of all, LGBTQ didn't have the right to marriage in New York until, well, not New York, universally in the States. And I usually use that because you could get married in different states earlier than that. But 2015 is when Obergefell was decided, and it became universal nationwide in the United States that you could have a same-sex marriage. But that doesn't mean we're treated the same. Number one, the prejudice put aside, just the dynamics of, like in my instance, we've been together for 38 years, weren't able to marry 38 years ago. So what we did and planned for our future and retirement, the court doesn't care. And they won't take it into consideration. So it's very different.
It is. And I think that, just like you said before, we were talking about a judge, how it is that they decide. Judges are human beings just like everyone else when they put their robes on. And whether they, had a good morning, whether they were sitting in traffic and they're frustrated when they get on the bench, they also come with their own biases. They come with their own thoughts and opinions about LGBTQ plus rights, people, communities, and couples. So how it is that they decide, does it have to be within the parameters of the law? Sure. But it can be skewed through the lens that they see it through.
And that's, what people have to realize is that's just human. It's very hard to say, it's one thing to be objective But to change who you are and how you look at the world is extremely difficult. And it doesn't change just because you put on a black robe and say you're sitting at a judge's bench.
Exactly.
So, it's natural and normal for people to view the world and view what's in front of them based on their experience. And unfortunately, there are some judges that, have prejudice and ill feelings toward the LGBTQ community, or maybe, one spouse to another. One maybe more towards a mother, more towards a father, or more towards this person, more towards that person. You never know.
Yeah, and we see it all the time, and that's very true. Yeah.
So you're better off taking control of your own business.
Agreed. So another myth, the last one that we're going to talk about, is a lot of people now, people are now saying that the divorce rates are going down, but that's because a lot more people are deciding not to get married. So people who are living together and creating lives together and creating families together, they are now sort of getting separated, right? They've decided to break up. But if they're never actually married, the myth is, well, we're not married, so the separation and us breaking up is going to be so much smoother.
That is so untrue. With big, bold letters. Why? Because people do things as married couples, whether they're married or not. Like if you and I buy a piece of property, whether we're related in a relationship or not, what is our responsibility and ownership with respect to that property? What happens if we decide we don't want to own that property anymore? It can be very complicated. And what I've always said for many years, because I see it all the time, the law catches up with what people do. So LGBT community for a long time was always pushing the envelope to try to protect themselves. And they did sometimes very creative things, but sometimes also created more problems by what they did. So you have to understand, just because you're not married, if you're acting like a married couple and you buy something together or you share children together, the law is going to get involved if you're dissolving that relationship. And if the children are at peril, or what's going to happen with the money you accumulated or not, maybe some things will be clear cut, but I guarantee you, because of my experiences, people do things without putting it in writing first, or thinking about the consequences, and then we're left to unravel it later when it's messy and it's not been taken care of properly.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I fully get it that people maybe have turned against the idea of marriage and that's not something that they want to entertain, and that's fine. But like you said, if they don't have the paperwork in place to decide about that house that they bought together, that business that they started together, how it is that they're going to share in certain retirement assets, all of that, if they don't have that all in writing, they're not going to be entitled to it under the domestic relations law. Because in New York, that's what governs marriage. So I understand not wanting to get married, but marriage does still offer protections that living in that relationship with kids, with finances, with shared with shared assets, you're not going to be afforded the same protections unless you're married.
And I want to say two things. One, prenup, or cohabitation agreement, something that spells out what your intentions are and what you're doing.
Yep.
Prenup is so a prenuptial agreement basically takes care of all of those things.
If you're going to get married.
But even if you don't ultimately get married, you can convert that or make it a different type of agreement.
Right.
You can make it an agreement as to that we have this relationship, and it doesn't have to be in contemplation of marriage.
Right.
But the bottom line is you need an agreement. If it's going to be married, then it's prenup. But if it's not, you can still have a written contract
Which
as to what you're doing.
Essentially that cohabitation agreement you were talking about. Very important.
Right. And you have to understand what you're doing with respect to that and protect what's important to you.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, just because you're in this relationship, if you and I are in a relationship and we do all these things, but we're friends, okay? We haven't gotten married, okay? So who's the court to tell me that I have an intimate relationship with you or I have a business partnership with you?
Very true.
And that's many times what has happened to the LGBT community. They bought a piece of property together before gay marriage was a dream. That's a business partnership. I don't care what you did to support this person and what they did in exchange for you. You bought a piece of property together. That's all I want to see, the dollars and cents. Who put in what? What are we selling it for?
Very
As
true.
opposed to what may be really part of that story.
Yeah. And that's why it's important what we talk about all the time. Prenup agreements, the cohabitation agreements. You get to dictate. You get to decide how it is that you want your life to be together while you're living together, while you're sharing expenses together, and in the event that you split. Because if you split in New York and you don't have that prenuptial agreement and you're married, well, then you have a law that governs that, the domestic relations law. If you're not married, it is so much more complicated.
Absolutely.
The family court is not going to step in because, like you said, I'm not going to determine that you're a couple. I'm not going to determine that I have any jurisdiction over that because you weren't married. So now it's, was this a business? Do you have an agreement? No, you want to fight it out? Go to civil court. Figure it out. As opposed to, well, no, we have everything written down. So very, very important that people understand, even if you're not married, but you have a life together, you should be protecting that from the beginning.
And you need to think about it and educate. Our colleagues say, what is the cost of the mistake?
Big time.
Big time. So, and people I understand, and especially in the LGBT community, we've always had to pay for extra things. And when I say extra things, like before same-sex marriage, and when you got same-sex marriage, before that was legal nationally, you had to do 6 returns, tax returns. Okay? I have to do more domestically as far as agreements or protection, whether it be wills, trusts, estates, durable power of attorney, things that everybody should have. But as a lesbian, if I was not married and had that protection, I did a lot legally to protect my spouse and I, or my partner, because I wasn't a spouse then.
Yeah.
So those are things that you have to think about and consider before you do it. And penny wise, dollar foolish. I understand it takes money to protect, but it's much better than dealing with the aftermath when you don't have it in place, because that can be much more expensive.
So true. Because if you're talking about an agreement at the beginning, and I'm just making up numbers, all attorneys charge different prices. But if you're talking about something at the beginning, maybe $2,000 on the low end, maybe $10,000 on the higher end, to have that agreement in place, I promise you, if you're fighting it out, I promise you,
it's going to cost you more to hire 2 attorneys.
Yes.
For the litigation that's going to come out of the mess that happened because you didn't have the agreement than it would have been to pay for the agreement.
Just have it at the beginning. Exactly. So we just want everyone to know what their rights are, and we want everyone to understand that, married or not, there are ways that you can craft your own agreements and create your own future. So
yeah, big time.
So thanks so much again, Concetta,
Thanks for
joining me on our myth busting session.
Yes, I love working with you.
And going over everything. I love working with you because you and I see things very similarly, where we really are so client focused.
Yep.
And it's all about education. It's about ensuring that everyone knows what it is that they're entering into, knows what it is that they're signing before they sign it, and knowing that they can create their best future. They just have to be educated about it.
So true.
So
thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And we'll talk soon.
Yes.